We are ready to finish up Polar the Titanic bear. I don't have quite as much to read as I did yesterday. And like I told you, it's a long story, but it's good and it's a true story. And remember, it's told from the bear's point of view. So that is something new for us. All right, we were reading that Douglas, the master of Polar, he got sick, then he got better, and they finally made it. They traveled all around the world, right? So they finally made it to Titanic. And here are some real photographs of the Titanic. That's somebody in the gym. Look at, that's how their exercise bicycles were back then. Different, huh? And then there's that grand staircase. Remember, the grand staircase went through all seven, I think it was seven floors, 7 stories. We had fairly smooth weather those first few days, where most of our time we spent on the deck where Master would spin his whip top or play ball. But we also loved exploring the great ship. There was a giant staircase with a big glass dome over it. Here is the grand staircase. Master sent me flying down the banister one morning. Whee! Went for a little ride, huh? So that was like his toy he used to play with. In the ship's gym, we saw bicycles and rowing machines. So they played outside on the deck for the first couple of days. Remember, Polor is telling the story. There was a lovely sun parlor on the upper deck where we spent our afternoons, and Master allowed a little friend of his to play with me. Our room there was even bigger than Master's bedroom at home. Wow. So there they could take a steam bath, or here, and then they could jump into the pool. Remember, the pool was salt water? And that was one of what the tickets looked like to buy to go into the steam room. One day, Master's mother and Muddy Boone went down to the lower deck and had a Turkish bath. They didn't like the hot steam one bit, although they did enjoy a cooling dip in the ship's swimming pool after. Of course, on cruise ships nowadays, the pools look much different, don't they? It was our 5th night at sea, and I had been in bed a few hours when I suddenly opened my eyes. Remember, this is Polor talking. The lights had been turned on, and Muddy Boone was dressing Master in a great hurry. What do you think happened? Come, we're taking a trip to see the stars, she said. And Master's parents were already dressed. They were gathering a few belongings together. I was surprised when I saw Master's mother reach for the life belts. That's what they called the life jackets back then, life belts. Then, seizing me from my little rack beside Master's bed, she tucked me under his arm, and we soon joined a group of people. Everyone was quiet, talking in hushed voices. Someone whispered that we had struck an iceberg and that water was pouring into the ship. A young man in a uniform helped fasten on Master's life belt. Goodbye, little man, he said. And then Master's father told us to follow him to the top deck, where we would climb into one of the lifeboats. So that's what their life jackets looked back then. Scary, huh? So there is Titanic in the background. The lifeboat was swinging out from the ship's side, and people had difficulty climbing aboard. When we got on, about 40 of us, lower away, an officer cried, and we were led down to the water. Master clasped me in his arms. His eyes were shut tight and his face was white. We finally reached the water safely and rowed toward the faint light. It was very dark. Aside from the stars, and the ship lighted, we could see nothing. Soon after we left the Titanic, the captain set up rockets as distress signals, like almost like fireworks. We all watched the ship, except Master, who was asleep. 2 hours later, we saw the last light go out, and we heard the dreadful cries that told us it was all over. The great Titanic had gone down. So remember, this is a real family that was on Titanic. So that was them in the, of course, these are all illustrations because nobody had pictures of that. It seemed like a horrible dream, a heartbreaking silence and feeling of loneliness. Toward 3 o'clock in the morning, an icy breeze sprang up and the sea grew rough. Master opened his eyes and he felt seasick. But Muddy Boons, who had him on her lap, soon quieted him with a story of Cinderella. About an hour later, somebody suddenly shouted, "Here comes a ship!" Looking toward the horizon, we saw a white light and then some rockets. So they are all rowing towards this other ship that they saw. As the ship gradually approached, we feared she might either run us down or not see us at all, since we had no lantern. But she slowed and stopped. A faint mist cleared just before dawn. The first rays of the sun cast a wonderful glow on the icebergs that rose out from the ocean. Master suddenly opened his eyes, and looking about him, he exclaimed, "Oh, Muddy, look at that beautiful North Pole with no Santa Claus on it." A woman who had been crying smiled at him through her tears. So that was the ship that came to save them, the Carpathia, it was called. The Carpathia raced through the night to rescue the Titanic's passengers in the lifeboats. So that's a real photograph of the Carpathia. And the next two pictures are real pictures of them being rescued. Maybe not of Douglas's family, but just of passengers. Our rescue ship, the Carpathia, looked very small amidst the few bits of wreckage where the huge Titanic had gone down. Trying to see. Oh, that's people in the lifeboat. We finally drew alongside, and the men climbed on the Carpathia with rope ladders. The women were hauled into some sort of swing, and the children were carried up in bags. Soon everyone had been rescued, except for me. Polor was left. I lay alone in the empty lifeboat. Several minutes went by, but nothing happened. Remember, this is a true story. My heart began to pound. I imagined being left there. Will I ever see Master again? Suddenly, I felt a jerk, and then another, and the boat swayed, and I nearly fell into the icy water. I slid down the ribs of the boat, banging my back against each one along the way, and landed in a puddle. "That's the last of them then," said a sailor, and he turned the boat over with a bang, and I fell onto the hard deck, so they were turning them over to clean them out. I lay there for what must have been hours, because, he's a stuffed animal, he can't move. And then I heard a kind voice, "Hello there, fancy seeing you again." So it was someone that worked on there. And so this is sailors hoist one of the lifeboats aboard the Carpathia while Titanic survivors line up for a hot meal. It was one of the sailors from the Titanic. He picked me up and squeezed the water out of me, quite taking my breath away. And then he carried me down some stairs into a warm room. It was full of passengers with blankets around them. Many of them held hot drinks. So this is a telegram from Douglas's father from the rescue ship to relatives at home. So a real message. "Polor!" a familiar voice shouted from across the room. It was Master. He rushed over and took me in his arms. I was delighted to see him again, but I was also rather upset that he was holding an ugly little brown bear. So they must have given the kids stuffed animals to try to help calm them down. They do that sometimes in hospitals too. His mother had bought it for him, thinking I had fallen overboard. As soon as Master saw me, he hugged me and kissed me, and he took me to bed with him every night after that, forgetting about the other bear. You know how you would get attached to your stuffed animals. So this is survivors making clothes from blankets and comfort one another. And this is a 3-year-old boy wears a nightgown made from one of the blankets. So they had They had all the Carpathia ship had all these extra passengers, and they didn't, I guess, have a lot of extra clothes maybe, so then they were just making clothes out of what they had. During the next 4 long days, Master and I spent as much time as we could on deck. But the ship was so crowded with more than 700 Titanic survivors, as well as the Carpathia passengers, there was hardly room to move. They spent hours cutting up blankets to make clothes for people who had none. So remember, we learned earlier in the week that about 2,200 people were on board, but only around 700 survived. So that's a lot of people that didn't make it. Yay! We see the Statue of Liberty, so that tells us that they are back to New York. At last, we slowly steamed up New York Harbor in the middle of a thunderstorm. Look at the big parade, Muddy Boons, with no brass band. Master cried as we saw the huge crowds of people and cars lining up for people wanting to see the survivors. Oh. I was happy to settle back down to country life. The experience we had gone through seemed to bring Master and me closer together. He made a great pet out of me and supplied me with 2 new suits of clothes and a little white wooden bed. I felt better, though, when Master tucked me into bed each night next to him and whispered, "Good night, Polor." Master goes to school now, and I am left alone much of the time, but I always look forward to the warm greeting he gives me on his return. He had been a good master, and he was blessed with a long, happy life. I will always be loyal to the end. And that is the story of Polor, a real family, a real stuffed animal who survived the Titanic. And so that kind of gives us a different point of view from the Titanic. Plus, we get to see it from the stuffed animal's point of view. Your job now, hopefully you have your stuffed animal, is you are going to write a story from your stuffed animal's point of view, like Polor, okay? The direction says, think about a stuffed animal that you have, tell about when you got it and what you do with it at home. So talk about what you do with your stuffed animal. Do you, or maybe, you know, when you were younger or whatever, make it up. It's fiction, okay? It can be fiction or it can be real too. So what do you do with your stuffed animal? Does he watch TV with you? Do you sleep with him? Pretend maybe you take him on a trip. Your directions here says write a paragraph from the point of view from your stuffed animal. How does your stuffed animal feel when it arrived at your home? How does it feel about spending time with you? Remember to write it as if you were the stuffed animal. So I didn't grab my favorite one, but my favorite stuffed animal, well, a stuffed animal I had growing up was Cinnamon. He was a brown bear. I got him when I got my tonsils out in 3rd grade, actually. And right now I sleep with a pink sloth. I call him Sleepy Sloth. Mr. Peters got him for me for Valentine's one year. So I would write, if I was Sleepy Sloth, you have to pretend that you are your stuffed animal. Why am I in this dark bag? What's all that sound? How come I hear giggling? All of a sudden, the bag opened and it was so bright. And I saw this lady wearing glasses with brown curly hair staring at me. And then she started laughing. She took me out of the bag and hugged me really tight. And she called me Sleepy Sloth. She is a funny lady. You see how I'm talking like I'm the sloth? She is a funny lady. She took me all around the house and showed me all of the cool things that we're going to be doing. She even introduced me to Viviana and Bennett, her kids. I like Viviana's curly red hair. Bennett was kind of rough. He threw me across the room. But my new Gina picked me up, brought me up to her bedroom, and we plopped down on her comfy, soft bed to watch a movie with Viviana. She looked right at me and said, "I'm going to call you Sleepy Sloth." And we sat there and watched a movie on the pillows. And then I would keep going. But do you see how I was telling the story as if I was Sleepy Sloth? That's what you're going to do with your stuffed animal, okay? You might fill this up. You should actually. You might even have to go to the back to write more or on another sheet of paper. That is fine. But have fun with this. So think about what you want to write before you write, okay? It's always better to stop and talk through your story, just the way I did before I started writing it. Then I can get my thoughts in order. And then you're going to write your story from your stuffed animal's point of view. And if you want to include a picture of you and your friend, go right ahead. We'd all love to see them. And then remember, at the end of the day, check back to read other friends' stories. It's always fun to help hear other stories, especially something fun like this. So I hope you have fun with this project. Remember, you are your stuffed animal. When you talk about yourself in the story, you're going to say you're like Gina, okay? Because I am now the stuffed animal, all right? So you are the stuffed animal. Got it? Have fun. Think about it. Talk through it first. You can go on a trip. You can go to school. You can go to the grocery store. You can go to the park. Wherever you want to take wherever you want the story to go, totally fine with me, okay? I just want you to have fun with it and just make sure you are writing as you are the stuffed animal. Have fun. I cannot wait to read them.